Hi, everybody. This is Gino Vanelli. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the persons appearing on the program.
Today on Rainbow Country, it's a family affair, especially when it comes to Vancouver Island-based synth-rock duo, Waveform Mountain. They're here to talk about their debut album, Processing, as well as members of Waveform Mountain being part of the Lgbt community. That and more in episode 417, so stay tuned for Gay Talk Radio right here on Rainbow Country.
Hi, this is Emily Saliers from Indigo Girls.
Hey everyone, this is Chris Harder, porn star, burlesque performer, and the creator of Porn to Be a Star. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Well, hello, and welcome to a brand new journey through Rainbow Country. As I like to call it, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And as always, I am your tour guide through Rainbow Country. I'm producer and host, Mark Tara. By the way, Rainbow Country originates from CIUT FM in Toronto and now syndicated across Canada from coast to coast to coast. The Yukon, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the east coast of Canada in Newfoundland, Ontario, even down to Buffalo, New York, and online. Well, thanks to you tuning in, streaming, downloading, but ultimately listening. Together we continue to build Rainbow Country into a nationally syndicated gay radio show, as well as being recognized as a #1 Canadian LGBT podcast. So, on this episode, a few weeks ago, I caught up with an independent West Coast band made up of family members. Dad, John, sound engineer who writes the music. Anders writes the lyrics and is the lead vocalist. And son, Seb, a sometimes third member, plays guitar and bass. That is the lineup for Vancouver Island-based synth-rock duo Waveform Mountain. And they join me on this episode to talk about their debut album, Processing, a combination of synth, rock, and ethereal vocals, all combining together for a rich landscape that is uniquely Waveform Mountain. They'll also talk about the fact that some members of Waveform Mountain just happen to be members of the LGBT community. Plus, in Hour 2, music from LGBT artists, independent artists, voices that we've come to know and love in classic disco, classic 80s, classic house, and on this episode I'm featuring some classic disco, a 3-song Waveform Mountain set, and more. All that lies ahead as we start Journey 417 through Rainbow Country and our first stop, the Rainbow Country Bookstore. Today, award-winning filmmaker and author Richard LeMay reads from his debut LGBT novel, All the Way to Wrightsville, which tells the touching story of male twins, one gay, Pete, one straight, Jackson, and Pete's journey to find himself and love. By the way, All the Way to Wrightsville has a rating of 4.1 out of 5 stars on Amazon.ca.
The evening went on in a blur of strange new people and limitless alcohol, and by the end of the night, everyone had retired to bed to get some rest for the next day. Back in the hotel room, Pete hastily got changed and jumped under the covers, There was a weird, almost undetectable vibe between him and Doug. He couldn't quite articulate what it was exactly, but it put him on high alert. Doug walked across the room to the foot of the bed, where he stood looking down at Pete. Slowly, he removed one article of clothing after another until he was standing completely naked. Again. "I think it's wild that you have a twin," he said, still looking down at Pete. Pete turned over onto his side and burrowed under the covers. "It's not so wild when you are a twin," he mumbled, thinking that would suffice. "Are you guys identical in every way?" Doug asked. I guess so." After several seconds of Doug staring down at Pete, Doug put out the lights and got into the other bed. Silence. Pete turned onto his back, staring at the ceiling in the dark. There was definitely a palpable energy that Pete was desperately wishing would go away. A minute went by. "Hey," Doug said. Pete almost jumped. He turned to look at him, his stomach tying into tightly wound knots. "You want one more drink?" Doug asked. Okay, Pete said quietly. The next thing he knew, Doug was sitting on the edge of the bed with 2 bottles of beer, still naked. Pete sat up thinking, what the fuck is happening? He resisted the urge to push Doug off the bed. Pete tried to keep his distance as much as he could, though they were separated only by a sheet. Pete could feel the heat from Doug's thigh. They drank in the dark, and Pete felt like he could sense Doug staring at him. His heart began beating faster. He tried to relax, but every alarm in his nervous system was clanging loudly. And that's when Doug leaned in and kissed him. Pete never even closed his eyes or kissed back. In fact, Pete didn't move an inch, as if he was frozen solid. Doug pulled back with a look that said, maybe I just crossed a line. Okay, that just happened, Pete thought. My naked boss just kissed me. Pete lay in the dark, wishing he had never come home at all. A few hours later, he got out of bed and headed downstairs. The house was dark, and every step he made was met with a creak from the floorboards. In the living room, Pete plugged in the Christmas tree and sat on the sofa in the soft glow of the lights. As children, the Moretti brothers would hide and try to ambush Santa. It became a thing with them, as well as their father, who would have to sneak around the house and ferret them out of their hiding spots before laying the gifts under the tree. Each year, they were told that Santa wouldn't bring them any presents because of their behavior, but he always did. Mr. and Mrs. Moretti's threats became hollow, and with each holiday, the goal was to catch Santa in the act. Pete sat staring at the blinking lights on the tree, thinking he had never felt more out of place. The thing that struck him as ironic was that he didn't have another life filled with friends and lovers. He had nothing substantial, only a secret affair with a married man, and yet nothing was the same as before he left. His mother's words echoed in his head. Clearly something is wrong. Part of him felt exposed. Part of him felt angry that his family could probe into his life. Was that love, or was it prying? Pete couldn't tell the difference. He just knew he didn't like it. Waiting for Santa? Pete turned to see Jackson standing in the doorway, wearing his Show Me Your Tits t-shirt. He got it in New Orleans the year before. He looked tired, but smiled at Pete. What are you doing up? Pete asked. Couldn't sleep, Jackson said, as he sat next to his brother on the sofa. They stared at the tree, the twinkling lights sending shadows intermittently throughout the room. Jackson took a glass of water from Pete's hand and downed it, placing the empty glass on the end table. That's okay, I was finished anyway, Pete said. Jackson shrugged. I figured. He turned to Pete. I miss you. I don't blame you, Pete said and smiled. Jackson smiled back. They both turned and continued to stare at the tree in a comfortable silence. Pete suddenly wanted to tell Jackson everything. He swallowed, thinking he needed to tell someone. Suddenly, Jackson turned to him as if he was about to say something. Hey, Jackson said with trepidation in his voice. Yeah? Jackson searched his brother's eyes in the light of the Christmas tree. He shook his head and looked away. I'm glad you're home. Pete knew that was not what Jackson wanted to say. He didn't press. They both turned back to look at the tree, Pete wishing he was still that boy waiting for Santa. So what are you into? Clay asked. Pete thought for a moment and shrugged. I don't know. You don't know? Clay asked with a sarcastic grin on his face. Pete felt a hot flush of embarrassment. What are you into? He asked with a smile. Clay smiled back and leaned in. He spoke almost in a whisper into Pete's ear. I'm into water sports. Pete looked at Clay, thinking that at least they had that in common. Pete loved to swim. He smiled. Me too. Clay pulled back with a look of slight surprise. Really? Yeah, Pete responded. My grandparents lived on a lake. You couldn't get me out of the water when I was a kid. Clay threw his head back and laughed out loud. That's funny. Is it? Pete thought. He wasn't aware he made a joke. Again, Clay looked into Pete's eyes. Well, lucky we found each other. Let's get out of here. I'm going to do this, Pete thought. He nodded his head. Okay. He stood up feeling very confident in his choice when Clay leaned in and whispered in Pete's ear, I can't wait for you to piss all over me. Pete looked at him trying to gauge his seriousness. He looked serious. Oh, shit. Water sports. I'm an idiot. It all became clear in an instant. That's wow, he said, unable to think of anything intelligent to say. Wow is right. Clay stared into Pete's eyes. Seriously, let's get out of here. He pulled Pete by his arm. Pete pulled back. I thought you meant swimming. Again, Clay laughed out loud. You're killing me. Too funny. Pete thought that nothing in this moment was even remotely funny. He looked at Clay and shook his head. I should stay here with my brother. No, you shouldn't, Jackson chimed in. Pete turned to Jackson as if he would hit him. He glared at his brother, thinking that no other opinions were needed on this particular subject. He felt the attention of their little group focused on him as panic began to set in. This new world was filled with the unknown. How do you not offend someone when you just don't want to pee on them? Jackson raised a drink to Pete. Go get him, Tiger. Tiger was something their dad would call them when they were kids. In this moment, that nickname was the last thing Pete wanted to hear. He kept thinking that his dad would be horrified to know his pet name was being used to instigate a night of water sports. Pete stopped. He looked at his brother, feeling the attention from their whole group fixated on him. Jackson smiled. I won't wait up. Knock him dead, buddy. Love you. Jackson hugged him. Pete whispered in his ear, I can't do this. Jackson pulled back and grabbed Pete by the shoulders. He looked his brother in the eye with genuine compassion and spoke quietly. You can do this. Just pull your dick out and wave it around. This guy will know what to do. Pete shook his head, staring into his brother's eyes with a crazed expression. No, I can't do it, he said in a whisper. Jackson registered something deeper in his brother's expression. He leaned in slightly and whispered, You mean like erectile dysfunction? Pete's face went slack. How the fuck did you... A hand gently pressed the small of his back. He turned to see Clay at his side. Let's go, Clay said with a smile.
At first, we didn't believe it. I was doing the international news for the Body Politic when I read a report in an American paper about a strange new cancer that was apparently affecting gay men. More sensationalized media homophobia, I thought. Didn't turn out that way. Some Body Politic collective members were back and forth to New York and soon reported that something serious was indeed going on. Guys who had seemed quite healthy months before were suddenly dying. Nobody knew what was happening, so everybody got to project their own prejudices on the blank slate of AIDS. If you were an environmentalist, it was obviously big city pollution. If you didn't like poppers, it was caused by poppers. If you didn't like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, it was too much sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Maybe it was all that sperm up our bums. If you were a fundamentalist Christian, it was obviously God's punishment, the wages of sin is death, and so on and so on. What we did know was that somehow it was connected to sex. That was bad news for those of us in the business of sexual liberation. We saw a whole community based on sexual networks potentially falling apart. We feared everything we'd built up over a decade was about to be destroyed, not to mention that we were all going to die. New York and San Francisco were already in a panic. Larry Kramer was screaming that we were fucking ourselves to death. Baths and sex clubs across the U.S. were being closed down. There were no effective medicines. If you had it, it was just a matter of time before you died. The government was doing fuck all, so we had to figure this out for ourselves. In 1983, the community came together to form the AIDS Committee of Toronto and began to organize care teams and support groups. Then HIV was identified. For the first time, we knew this was a blood-borne virus that could be sexually transmitted. ACT took on prevention campaigns. What squared the circle of sexual liberation versus a deadly sexually transmitted disease was safe sex. Condoms came to our rescue. We could still have sex, just had to use a rubber. AIDS in Toronto was born in the shadow of the bath raids, remember? We had just moved heaven and earth to defend these places. We weren't about to let them close down now. So while baths and clubs were being shuttered south of the border, ACT demanded there be no such closures in Toronto. Baths here remained open and became sites of outreach and education, and they're still open today. This is Tim McCaskill, a gay liberation dinosaur from another planet and author of Queer Progress.
When I return, Waveform Mountain.
Hi, I'm Saida Garrett, co-writer of Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mr. Mark Tara.
John, hi, how are you?
I am doing reasonably well. Just at the tail end of a cold, but feeling good.
Well, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
We're really excited to get to chat with you today.
Anders, hello, how are you?
Hi, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I am good, thank you. Sebastian, bonjour, comment ça va?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. Slept in a bit, but I'm here, so that's what matters.
You guys are based where? In BC?
Yes.
Whereabouts? Like Vancouver Island?
Yeah, Vancouver Island. So me and Anders both live in Victoria, and our dad, John, lives in Duncan.
Mm-hmm. And is Duncan in BC?
So Duncan's also on the island. We're an hour north of Victoria. So Victoria's right on the southern tip of the island, and Duncan is in the Cowichan Valley.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say thank you all for being here, to have your voices, your stories be heard by the LGBT community and beyond, especially to talk about your family group, your family band, Waveform Mountain. John, you are Anders and Seb's dad. You write the music. You are a recording engineer. Seb, you are a musician. You play bass. You play guitar. Anders, you are a lyricist. You're also the lead vocalist. Anders, you're also part of the LGBT community. You are transgender. I want to start here with Waveform Mountain. I want to start here. John, whose idea was it to start a family group, a family band of sort, to be like, Canada's version of the Partridge Family? Whose idea was it to start this?
It kind of stumbled into existence, and I guess I could say it was Anders' suggestion or idea that got the ball rolling, but I'd been involved in music for some time. My previous career had been in IT, networking and consulting, working for local government. But I'd always been working on music on the side, and I had a project studio in my previous house. And in 2022, I just finished building my new studio here in the Cowichan Valley. And we'd been through COVID, I'd been through renos, it had been a lot of work, and I was sort of at that point where I was feeling uninspired about music. I'd spent so much time doing work to get this studio ready that I really didn't know where to go. And it was actually Anders' birthday, and we were having a phone call, and I was talking about this, how strange it felt to be done and have this beautiful studio ready to do some recording and not really know where to take things. And Anders suggested, hey, why don't we just challenge each other to write some songs together? We've never done that. And so that was the start of it.
So is this a band? Is it a duo? Like in the some of the press material, I see the word duo, but there's three of you.
I'm not sure who should answer that.
Well,
Anders,
I think
take it away.
I started. Yes, I mean, officially, Dad and I started as a duo. Seb joined in on our second song just for fun, because we had this challenge to write 12 songs in a year. And then I think Seb ended up joining in on more than half of the songs, and so he kind of became an unofficial band member. And I'm sure at some point we've invited him to officially be part of the band, but I think he sort of preferred to be in when he wants to and out when he doesn't feel like it. So we have been calling ourselves like a duo with 3 members, or Waveform Mountain plus Seb. so
Special guest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
session music.
So John, in 2023, Waveform Mountain releases your debut album, Processing. Talk to me about this record and the sound, the sonic landscape of Processing.
Sure, but just a correction, 2024 we released it. Yeah, so we wrote most of the album 2022 into 2023, and then finished the mixing and mastering in 2023, and then started working on the process of figuring out how to launch an album, because we'd never done this before. But I'm a fan of synthesizers, both vintage and modern. And I'm a fan of progressive rock and synth-based music from the 70s and 80s. And that was probably the background that led me to creating the types of sonic textures I did. But really, it's layered synthesizer parts, and lush sort of arpeggiated sounds, sort of. Each song, it sort of took on its own identity, and then Anders created vocal content that just elevated these songs, and then Seb came along and threw in guitar or bass and background vocals. And to me, I'd say the sonic identity is sort of lush and rich, complex, harmonic, interesting content. To me, that's what it sounds like.
So, Seb, you are a musician. You play guitar, you play bass, you contribute to the songwriting process.
Yes.
On this record. When did you first get turned on to music originally? How did this come about for you?
Oh man, I mean, I've always had music in my life because Dad's obviously musical, and our mom is also musical. I mean, I started doing music in elementary school, technically, because there was a choir in elementary school, which you had to be part of. And I'm actually kind of glad for that, because otherwise I probably wouldn't have opted in. But it was actually pretty fun. And I don't know, in middle school, I started learning violin. Took private lessons for like 6 years. Never practiced enough. That's a tough instrument. But and then in high school, I started playing bass guitar. Dad used to play bass guitar as well, so he helped teach me a bit in the summer between middle school and high school. And then I joined the concert band there. And then by grade 10, I decided to join all 4 of the bands that were in school. So there's senior and junior concert band and jazz band. And then by the end of high school, I had started teaching myself guitar as opposed to bass guitar, and started writing my own music. And I think in 2018 and 2019 is when I wrote a couple of solo albums, and just recorded them in like my room and uploaded them to the internet. And I don't know, I've kind of always been doing music. I'm a huge fan of wide variety of genres, but I'm also specifically, I love soundtracks to movies and games and stuff like that. That's been a big inspiration for me.
So Anders, you are the lead vocalist. You write lyrics as well. For you and your musical journey, how did this musical journey for you? How did this all start? Was it through your parents' influence?
Yeah. I mean, similar to Seb, we have the same mom and dad. So So musicians there. Our grandma on our mom's side was like a very intense choir director who put us in a lot of things when we were young in a honestly a very Partridge Family-esque sort of scenario.
Wow.
Seb and I have 2 other siblings, so there are 4 of us, and also we have a cousin. So the 5 of us all together did a lot of things when we were younger. And then in my 20s, I had I guess a career in musical theater and theater in general, which I just sort of stepped away from only about a year before Dad and I started Waveform Mountain. And I honestly, I sort of thought I'd moved on from performing entirely. Like I felt like I was done with it. I'd done my time in theater, and that was great. And I was sort of ready to do other stuff. I'm working on my master's in sociology, and I just was like, I'm out of that world. And then somehow this has snowballed into a whole new side of things where I'm just doing, music, which is really cool. And it's cool to be doing, our own music. And it's very different from theater in that I'm just, playing myself, I guess, you'd say. And so, it's been a long journey, but a good one, and definitely very, very family oriented. Yeah.
So you just mentioned the perfect word, family. Talk to me, Anders, about the dynamics when it comes to being in a project with family members, your dad and your brother. What's it been like?
Great for the most part. My family and I are really close. Especially the siblings were really close, and then Dad is really close to all of us. So, oh my God, I don't know. I mean, mostly we just laugh a lot. I think there's been a lot of really, really good laughter while we've been creating this. I think we've had a good mix of being able to all sort of voice our opinions with minimal bickering. Maybe there are a couple moments where we had differing ideas and we were a little opinionated with each other, but for the most part we had similar visions, and so it worked out pretty well. And I guess, I mean, the reason why this whole thing started was really just, to me, it was an excuse to spend time with Dad, and then an excuse to spend time with Dad and Seb, and then sort of turned into, oh, now we actually care about this music, and now we want to put our all into it once we realized that what we were making was something we were really proud of. So I feel like for me, it's been more about family than it has been about the music, but then the music has been like a happy bonus accident almost on the side, which is really great.
And on that note, we'll return after this Rainbow Country update.
I'm Sandra Urian. And I'm Danny Bensi. And you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Hitmakers is a full-service, award-winning record label and social enterprise based in Iqaluit, Nunavut. We specialize in the creating and marketing of world-class Inuit and Indigenous music, including pop, hip-hop, rock, folk, and traditional Inuit music. Hitmakers has studios in Iqaluit, Ottawa, and Toronto. The label currently works with more than 20 Inuit and Indigenous artists, and we represent and promote many more. The company was founded in 2016, and our mission is to create viable careers in the arts for Inuit and Indigenous artists through music, media, and education. Our secondary mission is to empower artists to share and strengthen their stories and culture. To learn more, please connect with us on social media or at hitmakers.com. That's Hitmakers with a Z. Thanks for listening. Qoyan namit.
So, as you know, Rainbow Country airs on broadcast radio, streaming, and as an edited podcast. Most of those outlets and platforms are listener supported. So if you think what I'm doing here on Rainbow Country, working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond, is worthwhile, I hope you'll consider making a donation to this very outlet you are tuned to. If you happen to be listening to the edited podcast version, I hope you'll consider making a donation to an outlet that does carry Rainbow Country. How can you do this? Simple. Head over to marktara.com where everything is connected and hit the donation banner. That's where you'll find a list of all the outlets that carry Rainbow Country. A little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. Let your voice, let your support be heard.
This is gay hip-hop artist, the Mangfather Bob Katz. An artist friend of mine recommended that I check out Mark Tara's Rainbow Country years ago, and I've been enjoying it ever since. Mark's excellent interviews highlight all aspects of the LGBTQ community, and he's not afraid to ask the difficult questions that other hosts avoid. And I love, love, love the music that Mark plays on Rainbow Country each week, especially when he plays my music. But seriously, Mark Tara has been such a supporter of my music and has turned me on to so many great LGBTQ artists that I'd never heard of before. I'm so grateful to Mark Tara's Rainbow Country.
Hi, my name is Joanne Vanicola, and I'm an actor and a writer, and I was first on Rainbow Country with Mark Tara on discussing the massacre at Pulse Club in Orlando. I realized how important it was for our community to have a radio station, specifically for our issues, to talk about people in the LGBTQ community and to provide an outlet for our stories, to discuss our politics, culture, and give voice to the issues that matter to us. And of course our artists and the things that we do globally, and talk about culture. And without people like Mark Tara providing a space for this with a radio show like this, then we wouldn't have that voice. So support, tune in. Thank you.
Hi everyone, this is Mark Tewksbury, Olympic champion, leader, humanitarian. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
So Anders, John, Seb, you're all part of this project, this family project, Waveform Mountain. I mentioned earlier, Anders, you're part of the LGBT community. You are transgender. Talk to me, Anders, about having the support of your family while being family, but also working on music and being part of this project. How important has it been to have the support of your family while you're going through something so personal?
Oh yeah, I mean that's huge. It's huge and it's complex, and I am non-binary. I use they them pronouns. I'm just recently have started changing my name. Anders is my new chosen name, and it has been sort of lined up that coming out has happened like while we've been creating this album. I mean, actually on the album, you can hear in my lyrics, I write about characters with she, her pronouns for almost the entire album until the very last song has a character with they, them pronouns. And it's really just because that was just when I started coming out that I was writing those lyrics. So there's almost there's like the journey is captured in some of the lyrics. I feel incredibly grateful to have family support. Many of my queer and trans peers don't have the type of support that I have, which is really meaningful. I'm also not the only queer person in my family, so luckily there's like a good group of us that have, are on many points in the LGBTQ plus spectrum. And Yeah, I'm trying to think if I answered the question now.
Yeah, I think
Did
I think you're telling it just the way you need to. Seb, for yourself, having a family member, a sibling that is part of the LGBT community. Looking back now, were there any telltale signs for you that, there's something interesting about Anders that I'm not sure if Anders recognizes yet or not, but I kind of see something. Anything like that when you guys were growing up?
That's a really good question. I feel like, yeah, how do I answer that? I have 3 siblings, and I'm the only one who is cis. So, like, all of my siblings arguably had signs that, they were in the LGBTQ community. But I don't know if I could have even noticed that because, like, they were just, the people that I was closest to were all pretty much in this community. So it's like everyone else seemed weird to me. I don't know if that makes sense. Like,
yeah, it does make sense because it's who you know.
Yeah, and
right?
like even throughout, not as much in middle school because people were still, coming into their sense of self. Most of my peers, but like more so in high school. A lot of my friends outside of my family are also queer in some way. I'm bisexual, so like I have some personal connection internally to, the LGBTQ community. Our community is actually very much rooted in that, I think. Like our group of friends, me and my siblings are all really good friends, and we always have been. Even when we were younger and used to fight, we were still really good friends. So I don't know if that answers the question. I feel like there probably were signs, but that's just who Anders was. That's just who my siblings were. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
And John, for yourself, you are your dad.
I'm dad.
So for yourself and watching your kids grow and become who they are, looking back, how has that journey been for you as a dad, as a father, watching your kids grow and become who they are? What's that journey been like looking back over their progress?
I'm trying to hold in my emotions here. I'm so freaking proud of my offspring. All of them. So freaking proud. They're amazing, 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 amazing individuals. And, I think being a parent is something nobody knows how to do. People who have been parents can tell you what it was like being the parent they were with their offspring, but nobody can tell you what it's like to bring human beings into the world and care for them and hope that they can become human beings that they can be proud of themselves. And that, to me, is what I always thought of when my kids were little. I thought one day they're all going to be adults, and I hope that they will look at themselves and be proud of who they are, because as a parent, I think you'll always be proud of your children if you're loving, right? No matter what path they take, there's some part of you that's going to be proud that they're doing whatever. And, they've been through a lot of stuff. I mean, going through that type of personal growth that it takes to figure out who you really are is a difficult process for anybody. We all go through our lives learning how to become, hopefully, the ultimate version of ourselves. And I feel like all my children have done that in very unique ways. And just watching that bonding, the family bonding that's always been there. I get comments from people all the time about how strange it is how close my children are, because even in my family, I have 4 siblings and we get along fine, but we're not super close like my kids are. And and it's interesting to watch, and I'm really, really proud of that. I'm just proud of all their accomplishments. I mean, Sebastian is the most accomplished musician amongst all of us. He's released 3 albums. He's also written a novel, right? It's just amazing. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
You know, I have to say, John, it's unique for me, having this gay radio show, to have, you know, a parent and children be part of it on the same conversation. I think it's a rare period. So I have to say, like, thank you for being so honest and so upfront and so open about, you know, sharing, you know, your journey, because it is challenging, I would think, for a parent, and because, you know, they don't want, you know, their kids to grow up to, you know, to be, you know, bullied or hurt or anything like that. Like, that's the last thing that a parent wants for their kids. And to have, you know, children that are part of the LGBT community and watching them, you know, grow and thrive and be artistic and be able to express themselves, like, well done to you. Well done to you.
Thank you. I think you're right. I think it is rare. I was really happy that we were going to have this opportunity. I mean, partly we're wanting to promote our album. I mean, this is where this came about from. And just on that, a big shout out to ditcommunity.com and Daryl Hers and his team there for building a resource online that musicians don't know about, a resource for indie musicians to get connected and learn all sorts of things about the music industry and moving forward. And that's how we made this connection. And to me, it was, you know, exciting to get to come and talk about our music, but I knew that there's this aspect of it, which is, you know, we have been on a journey it's been, you know, at times difficult, but mostly just loving and supportive. And I think that I felt good that we were going to share that with people in the world, to share that, look, I'm not gay. I've never been gay. I've had gay friends. I've never been around a lot of gay community, but, you know, the kids have had a gay grandmother. You know, it was never an issue for me. You know, I grew up in the 70s, and in 82 we had our first, a friend of mine who came out as gay in high school. And I tell you, that was scary, scary times for being queer, and we were 100% supportive, and we were all ostracized because we were supported. And I couldn't imagine that, you know, I grew up with, I guess my parents taught me the value that people are people, you care for each other. You know, that's it. Like, you know, so if people are mean or rude or whatever, you try and change those behaviors or try and help them not be like that, or you just avoid them then. But you don't hate people. You don't be vindictive. You don't try and change what other people are about. So to me, I recognize that that's not how all people are brought up. I recognize that people are brought up with a lot of trauma and are brought up uneducated and not aware often, and that can cause problems. And to me, just being able to come on and be part of the community that says, you know, hey, care for each other, love each other, right? Like, that's huge.
Well said.
So thank you for having us, because that's wonderful to me.
Well, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Sebastian, Seb, I'm interested to know, it was just mentioned you wrote a novel.
Yeah.
In a nutshell, what's your novel about?
Oh man. Okay. So I wasn't expecting to talk. I've done barely any marketing. I'm really bad at marketing. But I will try to summarize.
Here's an opportunity.
It's called Sentinel. I self-published it. It is a sci-fi kind of a space opera. It's about 195,000 words, so it's decently long, but it is a self-contained story, and it's basically about an alien prince who's trying to save the galaxy and deal with the emotional journey that comes along with meeting interesting people making friends and also fighting a lot of over the top battles. I took inspiration from Star Wars and Star Trek and Mass Effect, and actually the Metroid game series was a big inspiration, weirdly. And for the action scenes, I was kind of inspired by the Mission Impossible movies. Like, I just was always trying to make them sort of like something I could imagine in a movie that was just a little more unreal and like a little more crazy than probably is realistic, but like hopefully is fun. I'm pretty proud of it. I think it turned out pretty well.
Pretty entertaining.
Anders, I'm interested to know, because I think I know the answer, but in regards to being a lyricist and being part of the LGBT community, do you think you come to your writing, especially with lyrics, through a queer perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything I create is sort of inherently through a queer perspective. I think that, I mean, the album is called Processing because it's a synth album. We thought it was kind of fun to have a computer term, but mainly because I wrote most of the lyrics in a time for me of like quite challenging emotional processing. And some of that had nothing to do with being queer, but a lot of it did. I think coming into I came into my sexual orientation first. It's funny. I struggle with words sometimes. Maybe bisexual. Maybe I just say queer. I have two beautiful partners, Chris, who uses he, him pronouns, and Sarah, who uses she, her. And once I settled in those relationships, I was able to start thinking about gender and realizing that this was this whole bastion of stuff that I had to work through and work on. I don't know how you feel about this, Mark, but I have found that coming out and coming into myself is a much slower and complex process than I imagined. I thought queer people just come out one time and then they're out and it's done, but that's not really what it's been like for me. It's a long process of figuring myself out, figuring out how I want other people to refer to me, how I would like other people to see me and recognize me, and how I want to see and recognize myself. And it's not just like you make one social media post and then it's done. It's like a long thing. So yes, I think a lot of the lyrics reflect that, even if they're not like explicitly about the coming out process, but a lot of the stuff I was going through had a lot to do with being right in the middle of transitioning, I guess. Yeah.
So bottom line, you're in a throuple.
Well, Sarah and Chris are not together, so we call it a V in the non-monogamous community. So I'm the middle, and then Sarah, and then I'm with Sarah, I'm with Chris. Mm-hmm. Sarah and Chris are not together, but they're both. I mean, Chris and I have been together for 10 years. Sarah and I have been together for 5 years. We're quite settled, and they're both integrated into the family, and
wonderful people.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I think some people think for some people being not monogamous is like another part of their identity. For me, it's just sort of happenstance, but it's I've just got really lucky. It worked out really well, and I have a beautiful life with them. Yeah.
So John, Waveform Mountain. This is the name of this project, this group, this band. Yep. Where does that name come from?
Well, we're so funny because part of the way that we came about the name was I went to Anders. We were probably 5 or 6 songs in, and I said, we need a band name. I said, we're going to have a call. And I said, we got 20 minutes to come up with a band name.
20 minutes? Oh my God.
20 minutes. I said, the reason is, like, I've changed my last name in my life. I have 2 children who have changed their first name in their life, one of which is changing their name again. And part of the issue is whenever you label something with a name, such as yourself, there's this question about, is that right? Is that right for me? Is that right? Is it right? And And the answer is, it feels weird to make a change like that, to come up with something. So my thought was, as long as it's reasonably good, we don't have to worry about what the name is, because it'll sound right eventually once we have it. So I said, we have 20 minutes. We talked about what were we about? And it's like, well, we're definitely a synth-based band. There's so much synthesizer in our music that there's got to be something reflecting synth. And we're a West Coast band. We come from BC. We all love spending time in nature. We all love being out hiking or at the lake or in the woods or camping or at the ocean. And so we tried to find two terms that brought that together. And Waveform was really the synth side of things, that a waveform is what is the default building block in a synthesizer. You choose a square wave or a sine wave or some sort of complex wave, and you make a sound. And mountain, we thought of forest at one point in time, but mountain became the one. So we like the idea that a waveform, the shape of a waveform when you record audio, could look like a mountain as well. So,
John, I have to ask you this because I just want to ask this, but do you remember a 70s, maybe 80s Canadian band called Prism?
Okay, so I'm a huge Prism fan, and I am going to see Prism for the first time in my life in 2 weeks here in Duncan. They're coming to our local brewery and doing a show, an outdoor show.
I didn't know that.
I'm so freaking excited. I've never seen Prism live. They've been touring for forever, but yes, I'm absolutely aware of Prism. I know at least the first 5 albums. I know all their songs on those.
Spaceship Superstar.
Spaceship Superstar.
I had on Jim Valance.
Okay, nice. Yeah.
One of the founding members and all that sort of stuff, and it's gone on to great, amazing things as a songwriter and musician.
I got to go to Long and McQuaid put on a songwriting workshop in Victoria when I was still living there, so maybe over a decade ago, and Jim Valance came and spoke at that, and I got to go listen to him talk about writing some of those iconic songs. It was great.
Yeah, because looking at your studio, you have a lot of keyboards, a lot of synthesizers back there.
I do. I believe I'm down to 9.
Well done.
And, but I have a wall of 80s. I have my Roland D50, my Yamaha DX7, and my Korg DW8000, and then I have more modern gear on the other side, and kind of got it laid out that way. A couple drum machines that you can't see that are just off to the side here.
So I'm going to put all three of you on the spot and ask you to pick one word that you think represents your debut album, Processing, and think of one word that you think what's the word that I want to use that puts this whole thing together, so to speak. And Anders, I'll start with you. What's one word that you would say best describes your debut album, Processing?
The first I don't know if this is a good word. The first word that came to mind is just deep, mostly because the sound is a deep sound, and maybe deep or complex. I don't know. That's a hard question.
We're going with deep. Sab,
we're going with deep.
Sab, let's go to you. One word to describe your debut album, Processing.
I think I mean, it's impossible really to pick one word. We're all not that decisive, but I'll say evolving, because I feel like, I mean, especially in the song Exhale, it's 10 minutes long, and it is sort of more like it's almost like a prog song. Like, it's still a synth song, but it's kind of almost prog rock in the sense that it like evolves through different chapters, so to speak. And I feel like that's sort of reflective of the entire album, is that there's sort of, you could almost imagine it, in my mind, it's kind of like a concept album. It doesn't have a clear storyline, but I feel like there's sort of a storyline going throughout all of the music, and I don't know, evolving. I'm going
Evolving.
with that.
John, one word.
It's funny. I almost went with deep and complex, but I came up with lush.
Well said. Well said. Lush. There's one track called The Empress and Her Queen. The Empress and Her Queen. Anders, what's the song about, especially lyrically? I love that song.
Yeah. Well, every single song on the album we wrote based off of a tarot card, and I drew a random tarot card, and this was my draw was for this one was the Empress, and specifically the tarot card, the Empress, is about femininity and about like essentially like all things woman, and it's hilarious because it came up just when I was moving away from womanhood, moving towards my non-binary identity, and so I thought, how can I connect with this? And I think for me, I wanted to write a song about sapphic love, which is something I feel I experience, even though I'm non-binary. I still feel like I'm really connected to like the lesbian community. And so this song is about the experience of growing up only being told hetero fairy tale stories and not really understanding where or how I could fit into those. And sort of then coming up with my own new queer lesbian fairy tale story called The Empress and Her Queen. Yeah.
Well said. Well said. I have to say to John, to Seb, to Anders, Waveform, Mountain, well said, well done, well recorded. Thank you all for your time. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
That was my spotlight on Canadian synth-rock duo Waveform Mountain, whose debut album, Processing, is out right now wherever you get your favorite music. For more on this family group, simply visit waveformmountain.com. And by the way, stay tuned because in hour 2, I'll be playing a 3-song Waveform Mountain set.
The phone rings. I got a message from the mayor. He's going to call me back the next day. I get the call, and he said, if you'd accept, we'd like to honor you with the key to the city. There was an event later that year in May. Just a key, right? Like, key to what? A decent job, a good singing career. It's really a metaphor, but it's history. So a reporter wants to talk to me and says, well, so it's a key, right? Like, what's the big deal? I said, well, not everybody gets the key. So I looked it up, and I guess it is kind of a big deal.
The date, May 17th, 2018, when trans activist Susan Gapka made history by becoming the first trans woman to be presented with the key to the city of Toronto. By the way, past recipients include Rush and the Raptors. And just like that, this little gay journey through Rainbow Country has come to an end. For the full 2-hour episode, simply head over to marktara.com where everything is connected and hit the archives banner. To keep up to date with the show, check out my socials at Mark Tara. The podcast is available on all major platforms. And finally, I want to take this time to thank you for taking your time to be with me. Remember, we are living in days of making dreams come true, so believe in yourself, and the world will believe in you.
Hi, I'm Simone Denny, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara